Dom, hello, how are you?
Hey Andy, how's it going? I'm very well, thank you. As well as we can all possibly be in this strange time.
This very strange time, but as your background is showing, it is also Christmas time. And we're
Yes.
going to have a fairly Christmassy conversation, I think, talking about your work at the Dickens Museum, performing an adaptation of A Christmas Carol for audiences, something I think you've been doing for almost 10 years, maybe more, you can tell me in a moment. But you are now doing online, and we're really excited to point our viewers towards the work that you're doing. Do you mind introducing yourself and also that work? Letting us know what dates people can see the show. We will have a link at the bottom of our film on our website, so people can visit and make sure to see you. But yes, please do introduce yourself and the work.
Great. Okay. Hello, I'm Dominic Gerrard. I'm an actor, and this Christmas, my solo A Christmas Carol show, which actually isn't technically a solo show because there is a physical presence of Scrooge there as well, which we can talk about. Because of lockdown, my show is going to be streamed live. Well, it's pre-recorded, but it's going to be a live stream of the performance from the Dickens Museum on the 17th, 20th, and 31st of December. And on top of that, just for fun, because this is the most amazing book, I'm also going to do an unabridged reading of the entire book on the 23rd of December as well. So I am determined that Christmas will happen this year from my point of view.
You're like the anti-Scrooge. You're determined to make sure Christmas is celebrated properly.
Completely, yes. I live for Christmas. It's always the climax of my year. Just about every creative thought I've ever had has pointed towards Christmas.
Great, and we'll talk about that. That's going to be our main focus for the film. But do you mind, you're very modestly not telling us about the incredible things you do in the rest of your working life. So would you tell us a bit more about your work?
Of course, yes. So I'm an actor and I'm also a musician, and I write and compose, and I also direct a little bit. And alongside that as well, I teach as well. So in lockdown, for instance, I directed a Macbeth all on Zoom at Drama Studio London, which was an amazing challenge. And you suddenly realize that creatively you can do all kinds of things that you didn't realize you could do in an online setting. And I'm also like you, Andy, I work in the education as well at Shakespeare's Globe. And yes, and I'm also actually coming up next year, hopefully for 2021, myself and Frederick Holmes, we're going to be adapting A Tale of Two Cities. So we've got another Dickens coming for next year. So there we go. I think that covers a few things.
That covers lots of things. Thank you. A Tale of Two Different Dickens adaptations. We definitely hope we might get you back to tell us more about that. But as I said, our focus today will be on A Christmas Carol. And I'm speaking to you as someone who recently, for my sins, read my way through the whole of Dickens, working chronologically because I'm a boring historian. And I inherited a set from my grandmother, and I'm here with my my very ancient edition of A Christmas Carol, plus a load of other Christmas stories. And I'm definitely not a Dickens expert, but I'm someone who's lived with Dickens for the last 4 years. Again, I know you've been living with Dickens in a very different way over the last 10 years with this particular story. But I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes in terms of, our two very different kind of lived experiences with this man and these stories. So if it's all right, the first place I would like to start is the start of A Christmas Carol, because it's just hilarious, I think, in its unabashed, outrageous naughtiness. Like there's this young writer who is mid-20s, early 20s.
Yeah, I think he just turned 30 when he wrote it.
Oh, okay, he's older than I thought.
A little bit, but still very depressing, really, when you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
you weigh up your own achievements. I feel like I weigh up my achievements.
And the first three words of the story are Marley was dead. And I'm so fascinated by that, because you open your story up and you're thinking Christmas, happy, happy, merry, merry, and then you get that very unhappy, unmerry phrase. And I've been thinking more and more about that phrase because, I mean, we're just at the end of 2020. We've had a kind of year in which death has felt very present in very new and different ways to us, culturally, socially, around the world. But I can't imagine using the grammar of that phrase in ordinary life to describe someone and to say that they were dead, as if that might somehow change. It's a very kind of odd way of putting it. It's not Marley is dead. It's not Marley has died. It's Marley was dead. And as someone who's performing this sort of language, you know, I wonder what that phrase does to you, because it's a phrase which implies that I know who Marley is. It's telling me as a phrase, I know who Marley is. I know Marley is important, but for some reason I do not know that he's dead, and I need to be told that. And at the same time, it's strongly suggesting he might not be dead later on in the story. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on just from the first three words, and all of that feels like a challenge for a performer.
It is, and I sort of come out with it in a different way each time, and sometimes I kick myself and go, no, you shouldn't have done it like that, you should do it like this. But what I love about it is, you're right, it's completely on the nose, isn't it? Marley was dead, colon, to begin with. It's just that he just sets it up and knocks it down. So those first couple of pages, just trying to think, well, where's he going with this? What's he doing? And I don't know whether as a writer he's sitting there going, where am I going with this? What am I doing? Or whether it was all, I don't know. But what I love about that is the spontaneity of it. You know, the fact that he's really holding you in a conversation right from the beginning. I really love that, and of course the ambiguity. I mean, that's what's so magical about this book, this A Christmas Carol, is the way I think that the way ideas and almost words on the page kind of dissolve and fade and come in and out of focus, like some of the ghosts. So yeah, it's almost as if he himself, the author, is slightly puzzled by the fact that Marley is definitely dead, particularly because Scrooge signs all the documentation to say that he is dead, and there's no way on earth Scrooge would sign something that wasn't absolutely exact, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really lovely, isn't it? Yeah, that phrase right from the start puts us in a strange world in which people being dead might not last for very long. This kind of weird, uncertain, afterlifey world in which, as you say, things might dissolve, fade, and refocus, and that's literally what happens to characters here. I also love the fact that reading any Dickens feels like a very Dickensian thing to do, in that Dickens himself was a wannabe actor, would have been very jealous of you doing your job, and at the end of his life, there's this weird kind of self-karaoke traveling the world, traveling the UK, but also America, reading extracts from his novels, including this one, and not just at Christmas, right? So you're doing a very kind of Dickensy thing. You've hinted there a little bit already, but can you tell us a bit about what this text is like to read, to perform, to inhabit? You talked about it inviting conversation in particular. Yeah, do you mind telling us about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, I think first of all, I mean, I know the experience, and actually, you can get this with classical dramatists. You know, you can look at Shakespeare or Marlowe or something. Sometimes you look at the page and you think, oh my God, that is a wall of words to get through. Until you're speaking it aloud and you're up on your feet, sometimes it can feel a bit like that, and certainly with Dickens. But more and more, I really, really appreciate that just virtually everything he ever set to paper, and that includes letters to friends and relations, is designed to be read aloud. I mean, I don't think he's ever written anything where he didn't hear it in his head or speak it into a mirror in his study, you know, and perfect it. So that's the first thing. It is a gift for any performer, any actor, storyteller, or just at home, just amongst your friends, just to read it. I've done, before I actually did this production, on a couple of occasions with some friends, we'd sat round and read the whole book just for fun on Christmas Eve, and that in itself is a wonderful thing to do. What I do find very interesting, though, and stop me if I've stopped answering your question, but hopefully you can always just wind me back. But is the fact that the challenge of performing it is, I found myself wanting to go against the grain of what I might normally do, adapting it. So very often, if you're dealing with text, you want to sort of trim it down, and you want to make it bouncy, and you want to make it succinct and short. You don't want rambly bits, because you feel like you're going to lose the audience. It turns out that actually that is completely wrong, because it is precisely those long lists of food that he talks about with the Ghost of Christmas Present, for example, or the descriptions of the fog and the snow that are just a real feast to not only share, but also to listen to. And I think what's really also I found interesting is the fact that you mentioned Dickens' own touring of the book and many of his other novels as well. I got hold of his own adaptation of A Christmas Carol that he did for his readings, and then I put it against, obviously, this version. Been waiting to show you this. This is nice, isn't it? I found myself wanting to put things in that he had cut out himself. which I find really interesting, because you think, oh, no, don't cut that. No, we love that. Don't cut that. So I suppose to wrap it up in a sense what I've learned is don't take the easy way out with it. Don't have your 21st century head on with very short, snappy phrases and sentences. He does that. He does have very short statements. The first one, Marley was dead, to begin with. You know, that's pretty... It's a bit like Call Me Ishmael, isn't it? Yeah. At the start of Moby Dick, which thinks, oh, this is going to be a very short, you know...
Yeah, I love that.
Sort of
yeah, and, you know, one of the things you're cluing us into is how differently literature and text in general can look on the page compared to how it feels coming, you know, out of a human body and into other human bodies in a real-time experience. And a thing like a list on the page makes your heart sink a little bit, but a list in real time immediately, you know, it evokes questions of why is this person still talking? What are these various items? How do they relate to each other? And often lists, particularly in Dickens, can become outrageous just in their length and in the weird things that they happen to be combining. And A Christmas Carol, I had to reread myself of it last night, and there are moments in which some of his verbal choices are just outrageous. And I'm trying to find this moment here, but there's an alarming door knocker towards the start of A Christmas Carol, which the novel describes. Why can't I find this phrase? Here we are, as a bad lobster in a dark cellar. The door knocker is like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. That's my favorite phrase of all time.
It's lovely, isn't it? It's the dismal light around it, isn't it? And the way he holds you in that moment, I mean, it's perfect. It's just perfect. Talking about the horror in Marley's face, but it's not anything to do with the face.
It's the lighting.
Yeah, it's the lighting, and it's also the sort of, it's the expression, the horror is there in spite of the face somehow, beyond its control, and all that stuff. Like you say, you're talking about the lighting, that's fascinating, isn't it? Because, you know, you're dealing with an author writing in the 1840s before, God, CGI and stuff like that, where he has all these special effects in this book. He dreams, he imagines flying through walls and figures appearing that are faded and moving in and out of, you know, and it's just wonderful to hear it said like that. But yeah, I love the lobster in the dark cellar stuff. But something you said right near the start, you're saying about how it's odd to start a Christmas book with that phrase, Marley was dead. And you think, but actually that's also what I love about it. What I also love about Christmas, because I quite like the dark side of Christmas. I like the contrast. And I think that's very important when it's coming to having a Dickens adaptation, is you have to have all of Dickens. You have to have the poverty and the darkness and the cruelty and the hardship set against all the warmth and the glowing parlours and the friendship, and to get the full thing, which the Muppets, they do that very well, don't they? They have that's pretty spooky in places, you know. So yeah, no, that's the lobster in a dark cellar. I love it. There's also a really funny one. I don't know if you clocked this one last night when you were reading. There's I think I've marked the page. But there's this where Scrooge goes back to the school, and he sees himself as a young boy being really excited reading all his books, and he describes a parrot, and he says, "There's the parrot," said Scrooge, "green body and yellow tail, with a thing like a lettuce growing out of the top of his head." You know, and in that section, you're about to see some really dark stuff happening, you know, but it's wonderful that Dickens throws that in, which is a gift for a performer, again, isn't it? I mean, if you imagine going to see Hamlet, where the person playing Hamlet isn't funny, ever. That's a long night, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, in both of those cases, the parrot and the door knocker, it's unexpected food, which show up in those similes, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? But they feel like deliberately provocative comparisons purely because they're so unexpected. Yeah. And obviously the thing they're describing is also unexpected, so it's kind of serving that kind of purpose. But it's also just a kind of a flirtatious ostentation of style, I think, of just, let me surprise you with the following words.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course he doesn't have, because he didn't go to university, so he hasn't been polished, he hasn't been smoothed out. You know, the criticism leveled at Dickens, that his lack of restraint and sometimes lack of taste, in much the same way that you might criticize Van Gogh for overloading his brush. And you think, well, thank God he did. Come on, you know, so yeah, he's an interesting guy in that respect, isn't it? But what I love about him is he's so completely unapologetic about it either, as well. You know, he just goes out there. He doesn't seem to be in any way defensive or trying to. I've never seen anything where he's tried to defend what he's written and the way he's done it.
Yeah,
which I think is incredibly rare, actually.
Yeah. So, Dom, this is a story which is all about time and reflecting on your past, your present, and your future lives. What does it feel like for you then to be doing this on a yearly basis? You are yourself having this kind of repetitive or cyclical connection to this story each year. Has the story changed for you? Does it change with each performance? Does it feel like it changes from year to year?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it really does. It's very different from when I first did it. When the first year, me and Tim Carroll put it together, and that was back in 2010, and we did one performance at the German Street Theatre, and that was it. And there are some years where I haven't been able to do it, other work commitments or whatever, but it's definitely changed over time. I definitely feel like I've changed over that time, and I wish I could be more specific about how. I mean, the thing is, though, it's that thing of, because the audience is different, and it's the same for any performance where you're kind of touring or doing more than one show. You're trying to communicate the idea and the story to a completely different set of people, and those people combined are a different consciousness. So it is different. I mean, I think where it's very different for me this year is having to have filmed it and not having had the audience in the room with you, and that sort of connection. And that's really fun. And I will miss that until we can have that back again. But the really fun thing about this film, which we can't normally do, is that as Scrooge goes out on his journey with the ghosts, we basically go into different rooms in Charles Dickens's house. So when Marley's ghost appears in Scrooge's bedroom, it's actually Charles Dickens's bedroom. That's pretty fun, isn't it? I hope he doesn't mind. And at the very beginning, I mean, the house itself at Doughty Street, at the Charles Dickens Museum, that's where we start the film, in Mary Hogarth's room, where she died, and he was obviously very much devoted to her. He liked his wife's sisters, didn't he, Mary and Georgina? And it's complicated. It's complicated, but at the same time, very powerful and very, very sincerely felt as well on his part. So yeah, that is fun. That is fun. That feels like a one-off, and that's something that probably we wouldn't have put together if we hadn't been forced to. So yeah, so that's definitely different. This year is very different from the other years, I think, for that reason. Yeah,
that's fascinating, and that's going to be my next question. Really, was thinking about specifics of how things have changed. So you're doing it in the Dickens Museum, which, as you say, is one of Dickens's former homes.
Yeah.
And then we're all watching you from our homes because of lockdown, and it's a story which is about home. I mean, kind of Scrooge, if I remember rightly, Scrooge is actually living in Marley's old rooms. So there's a sort of homelessness thing going on there. And then Dickens himself, Dickens is clearly obsessed with the idea of home, but he had so many he had like a portfolio of properties he was either renting or owned. I don't think he was in the Dickens Museum home for all that long. And there's a fabulously cheeky moment in Claire Tomalin's biography where right at the end of his life, very sadly, he helps his daughters to put on a play, and he's found backstage afterwards, sat in an armchair and believing that he's at home. They've been putting on a play at a friend's house, and he thinks he's still at home. And Claire Tomalin says, one is tempted to ask him which home, because he spent so much of his time not just moving from home to home within London, but operating other houses in Kent, a house for his mistress, constantly traveling around the UK giving readings, traveling as a journalist. He's sort of someone who is never home, it seems to me. And yet here we have this story and this writer who cares so much about the idea of being home.
I think, and you've made me sort of think this for the first time, I think, is that I feel from what you've said there, it's like he's trying to construct and create his ideal home, in his ideal family unit. Very much the patriarchy, and he's the king of the place. You know, it's his castle. But because of his childhood and the hardships there, and parents and the family going into the debtor's prison, and him having to work in a blacking factory, you know, I think. And also, actually, I mean, to be completely honest, and I can see why people sort of found him vulgar, he was quite into his bling as well, wasn't he? I mean, yes, this is the 19th century, and he's very much the Georgian, you know. He has a bit more of Byron about him, I think.
Yeah, he's a dandy, I think.
More Byron than Brunel, I think. You know, I think he's got really flashy waistcoats, and he likes to spend money, and he also is very generous. He's very much the ghost of Christmas present. And it's a Victorian as well, isn't it?
Very good hair. You ever look at the pictures of Dickens? He's always got very good hair too.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and he took great care of it. Apparently, you know, and he used to. I think I don't know if I saw this recently, but I think he used to put curlers in his hair when he was quite young because he wanted those curls to be sort of really, you know, sort of out there.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah, quite. And of course, and he was so popular and so humorous and all of that. And there were plenty of people that probably scorned that and then judged his work through that lens a bit. But yes, I do think that's probably it. He's looking all the time for the perfect, ideal home, which is obviously what so many of us do at Christmas. And it's going to be very hard this year, you know, being apart from people. So that's, yeah, and it's a very Victorian thing as well, isn't it? The idea of the proper, perfect household and family and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know enough about the history of Christmas really, but it feels like Dickens himself is so integral to the way that we now think of Christmas. You know, he's not just responding to Christmas traditions, but he's sort of creating a lot of them, I think. And he himself became a bit of a tradition. You know, he would write a regular Christmas story, a bit like you at the Dickens Museum, regularly giving these performances. Dickens himself would write a Christmas story, not every year, but regularly, and it became a bit of an institution, I think.
Yeah, it did, and they kind of fizzle out a bit, I think, don't they? They're not the first one. The Christmas Carol is the one that really just is wonderful. But I'm a fan of the chimes as well. I don't know what you thought of that, but that's a really interesting one. The one that he did the year later, in 1844. What I find heartbreaking about the chimes is in a Christmas Carol, you think, yeah, well, Scrooge deserved to be put through that actually because, you know, he's had that coming for a while. Whereas the central character of the chimes, Toby Veck, Trotty, he's put through it, isn't he? He's sort of punished by ghosts and things, and he's pretty blameless. All he's done, actually, which is very much for our times, is he's read the newspapers and been judgmental towards someone in the papers who's been sort of scandalized for, based on a real person, actually, I think, who a desperate mother who jumped into the Thames with her child. I think that's right. So yeah, so that's a very bleak one. And then I think there was a review of the Cricket on the Hearth that came later on. I think someone reviewed it, describing it as a load of twaddling nonsense. Which seems a bit harsh because this is Dickens we're talking about. So yeah, he definitely. And actually, what's interesting though, you know, the idea that people think that there's no Scrooge in Dickens, and I think there is. I personally think that Dickens is every character in this book, and we all have Scrooge traits that we have to deal with, don't we, at various points in our lives, especially at Christmas, because you're tested. You know, if there are people you've been trying to avoid all year, you don't have the excuse at Christmas. You have to kind of be your best person, your best version. Yeah.
Happy Christmas, everybody listening to this.
Yeah, happy Christmas, one and all. Yeah, I'm not referring to anyone in my life
that we won't tell anyone that you know about this film. It's all right.
Mine is cut this whole section. Sorry.
We ain't doing that. Dom, would you mind telling us, are there bits of the adaptation or the story that are particularly challenging to perform or to communicate to modern audiences? Are there bits which feel especially easy? I'm thinking both in terms of narrative content or, you know, phrasing, language, whatever really.
I suppose, yeah, there are sections that are challenging. It's like the performing of Shakespeare. You've got long thoughts and long sentences that you have to have a lung full of air to get through it if you want to deliver it nicely, and you want to do it trippingly, and you want to. And with the carol, it's a Christmas carol in prose, but it's very much a carol. It's very much like a musical score, and I know that feeling when I've not quite hit a moment, and you kind of. It's such a shame because you know how it's meant to be. So there are key moments where I feel like you just got to be very pacey with it. A challenging moment is getting the list of food wrong. I mean, who can blame me? Come on, Dickens cut that list from his own adaptation. I really understand why. But he says there's one line in his adaptation which he performed where he says something like, "The room and all its contents vanished instantly." And I went, no, I'm going to keep the original. I'm going to go holly, mistletoe, red berries, turkeys, geese, game, sausages, oysters, puddings, fruit, and punch all vanished instantly. And I've kept it, but there have been times when I've cursed myself for keeping it because I got it wrong. So that's a challenge. That's a challenge, but it's also a fun challenge. It's almost like, come on. It's like Dickens is there saying, come on, let's have this. And it's just a real pleasure. I mean, I think there are challenges. I think, but I think I'm lucky in a sense in that because it's a solo thing and it's quite, it's quite humble in one sense. It's not lavish. It doesn't have big revolving flying sets or anything like that and lighting and a big score and lots of other actors to play opposite. And so you don't see the ghosts. I mean, as in my one, they're not visible. You have to imagine them. And so actually, that makes my job easier because I think it's very easy to disappoint people with A Christmas Carol because even people who haven't read the book have very strong feelings about what it is and what it should be. And so I don't have Jacob Marley coming in floating with chains or anything like that. So the biggest challenge really is making sure I'm operating the Scrooge puppet properly and that is holding. So I think, and that challenge was just getting over the initial fear of having a puppet in the first place. That was Tim Carroll's idea. And I already thought it was enough of a challenge to just kind of perform it as me, like, in the way that Clive Francis, Simon Callow, any number of solo Dickens performers might have done, or James Swanton, but here I've got this puppet that I've got to operate at the same time. And you think, oh, really? So it's trying that, I suppose, that works. And for some people, it really does. I wonder if it's a bit of a Marmite experience. The people that come to it now seem to really, really, really love it. But I'm at the right place. I'm at the Dickens Museum, you see. They're all up for it. So that's really good. I think, and rather than challenge, the real pleasure is actually is introducing things that I've seen missing in many adaptations. Like with the Ghost of Christmas Present, when they fly over the sea and they go to the lighthouse and they see the two men in the lighthouse wishing each other a Merry Christmas with a can of grog and all of that. I mean, I can understand why an adaptation would feel the need to just, that's got to go. But putting that thing I was saying earlier on, having that in there, I don't know, it's so exhilarating because it feels new. So and that brings me to the main answer to that question, is that it's a story everybody knows or thinks they know, and you've got to tell it in a way that feels fresh and new, like it's not been told before, which is always the acting challenge you have to do, whatever you're doing. And that dramatic possibility. I'm sure you will have done this, Andy. You watch The Lion King and you watch Mufasa go down into the ravine and you think, maybe this time I'm going to get out.
It'll be all right.
No, but do you know what I mean? I can't bear it. It's the most unbearable thing ever made, that moment. But it's that dramatic possibility. It's that challenge, isn't it? I think keeping it sort of fresh. But Dickens gives you the armory that you need for that. He gives you the weapons for it, because alongside all the phantasmagoria and all the sort of baubles, there's very, very, very harsh social realism in there as well. So there's my long rambling answer to that question.
It's a brilliant answer. Social realism, and then the kind of the psychology of this hugely angry man who is in such denial that he moves between believing the ghosts are there and believing that they're telling him something really fundamental for his soul and for his future in the afterlife. And he moves from that to then kind of going, but they're not really there. I'm not having any of this. I'm going to continue being angry. That will be fabulous.
Yes, absolutely, he does, absolutely. But actually, do you know, that's what the other thing that makes it such a great story is it's such a human story, because Scrooge isn't evil, is he? I mean, he's not Voldemort or Sauron or Megatron to really date me. He's just like any one of us who chose a path, who became very worried about money and chose a path to just make sure that he was resilient and was bulletproof against any, economic catastrophe. His fiancée, Belle, says to him when she breaks up with him about, you fear the world too much. So Scrooge is operating out of fear. You know, he's not, and of course, this was a challenge for the adaptation, actually. When the Ghost of Christmas Past takes him back to his school, within seconds of seeing himself as a young boy, he breaks down. So all the goodness, all that humanity is in there. It's just that he's suppressed it and chosen, you know, and I think that's what's so clever about it and why it reaches people. You know, it's not a case of, like with Macbeth, where we're having to think, yeah, oh no, yeah, better not kill a king. You know, it's kind of, it's different. It's kind of like, it's that moment when you were just a bit of a jerk to someone, or you didn't give them the time, or you let them know somehow that you didn't want to have a chat with them right then and you needed to get on. Yeah. It's those little things as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned Shakespeare earlier, and Shakespeare and Dickens often get linked, but I often wonder if Ben Jonson, who's another contemporary of Shakespeare's, Dickens performs Jonson, and I often think Jonson might be the secret for unlocking Dickens, because Jonson's comedies are all about psychological illnesses in which people seem to be fixed forever, and then the play tries to purge them or rescue them from that psychological condition. And it feels like this is yet another of Dickens's many stories that does exactly that. Here is someone who, for whatever reason, is trapped in traumatized psychological cycles and circles and only really has one way of responding to the world. And it's a story experimenting in him breaking out of those cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that, but it's also that thing of kind of, with Scrooge certainly, is he knows, doesn't he? Deep down he knows, which is why it gets to him so quickly. Which is why in the adaptation, for me, I had to slightly delay his kind of softening a little bit to the end. Yeah, I think so, because I think dramatically, if he's contrite too soon, for too long. I mean, what's nice is he comes back out of it, doesn't he? What's so great about it? He goes, no. And the ghost will say, what's the matter? He goes, no, nothing. You know, sort of swats them away. So it's a struggle. And actually, what I also really love, and this is another thing about the adaptation, which I think I hope me and Tim were really true to the book on this. And I feel like you don't always get this in adaptations of the Carol, is that when Scrooge wakes up after the last ghost has visited him and he's at the tombstone and everything, he finds himself back in his bedroom and it's Christmas Day and he's going to be all right. Actually, he's got work to do then. It's not all brilliant, you know. It's not from that moment he doesn't, you know, get dressed and go out, grab the turkey, and he has to face the portly gentleman again, or the portly gentlemen even, but who came into his counting house the day before, and he has to sort of make that right. And he has to go, the book talks about him going up to his nephew Fred's door and losing his nerve before knocking to say, I've come to dinner, and are you going to let me in? You know, it's not all wrapped up in the way, you know, we sometimes in adaptations, he wakes up on Christmas Day, and it's usually saved to the last few minutes of the film. And it's like you have a song, and you wander around the streets, and everything's great. Which I think is another thing that pins it in reality. I think as a book, it's not given the credit sometimes for being realistic, actually. Yeah. But I love that you mentioned Ben Jonson. I'm fascinated by him. God, killing people in a duel and...
Me too, and I'm convinced Dickens was as well. And you know, Dickens' naming practices have nothing to do with Shakespeare and everything to do with Ben Jonson. Everyone's name says something about what they are like as a human, and in terms of their psychology. Almost every Dickens character has a very specific gesture and posture, particular kind of verbal repetitions. So again, having read through all of Dickens, you used the word dismal earlier to describe the door knocker, and that, for my money, that's Dickens' favorite word. It's in almost every paragraph. Everything in Dickens is dismal at some point. But the word humbug, I'm pretty sure, only occurs in The Christmas Carol. So it feels like it's, you know, it's a distinctive part of Scrooge's own mental paraphernalia. It's ditto the word bah, you know, B-A-H, that whole bah humbug thing. I'm not stating this as an absolute fact, but I don't recall seeing either of those words anywhere else. So it's kind of like a, you know, a psychological marker of Scrooge's identity.
Well, yeah, and not only that, I've got this for you, Andy. This is my question for you. I don't know. Is it one of the first time travel novels ever?
Oh.
Stories in Western literature anywhere. I mean, I don't know. That's what's so perfect about it. It's Christmas, it's got ghosts, and it's got time travel, you know?
I do not know enough about the history of time travel in literature to answer that question, but it's a very kind of focal example of time travel, isn't it? I need to think about that a little bit harder. But quite possibly.
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? And obviously, Robert Zemeckis with Back to the Future, and he did that Christmas Carol film as well. I mean, just the influence of the book, I mean, it's too early to say, isn't it? Its influence is just going on and on and on through adaptations, you know, Scrooged, It's a Wonderful Life, even things like Groundhog Day have that kind of Christmas Carol setup, don't they?
Absolutely. Dom, this has been so fascinating. Thank you very, very much. We end our films by asking what the word literature means to you, where it sits in your personal vocabulary. But I'd also be interested to hear what you think the word literature means, either for Dickens or for A Christmas Carol or for A Christmas Carol in Dickens's house. What does that word make you think?
Well, I think what it means to me is what I'm pretty sure it meant to Dickens, which is that it is the spoken word. So it just so happens that, you know, certainly in the 1840s, you do have to write it down on some paper and, you know, have it printed and all of that. But it's the spoken word, and it's very much about reaching people and trying to influence people and engage with them. And there's no better way to teach us about our lives, is there? Literature. That's what it's all for. And Does that answer that in some succinct way? I mean, I really think that's what it is. I mean, my first introduction to A Christmas Carol was an old cassette tape of Ralph Richardson and Paul Schofield. I did say Paul Schofield, didn't I? Not Philip. Yeah, Paul Schofield reading it, and I absolutely loved it. And I think I had that cassette when I was about 7 or 8, and it was a bit beyond me, some of it, but just the language just really made such an impression on me. Years before I'd even come across who Shakespeare might have been, kind of thing. And I think that really emphasizes that. I think certainly great literature, you want to kind of read it out loud. And if you're not having it read out loud, even if you're by yourself, you can sort of hear and feel the voices inside as you're reading it.
Yeah, I love that answer. And that idea of trying to influence and engage people, I think, is a good reminder that everything we've just said about Scrooge is also sort of implicitly true of the reader or the listener, that the story is also seeking to help us, I think, by asking us to unpack our Scrooginess and to reflect on our past, present, and future. And I feel like that's a very 2020, that's a good thing for us to be doing as we get to the end of this particularly unpleasant present and look forward to a better future.
Yeah, gosh, yeah. I think we're ready for a better future, aren't we? I hope we earn it. I hope we get there.
I feel like that's a very, very good place for us to end. Dom, thank you ever so much. Happy Christmas to you. Happy Christmas to everyone watching and listening. Good luck with the performances and the screenings, and we will look forward very much to seeing them.
Bless you. Thank you so much, Andy. It's been a real pleasure.
Cheers, Dom.
See you soon. Happy Christmas.